Start our meeting. Please continue eating, not talking, just eating. Jean had a wonderful lead in to the announcements we have today with his emphasis on the origins of Rotary and what it means to be a Rotarian, very much based in service. So I'm going to start with a brand new, we have 3 service opportunities in the next few weeks. This is one that was just introduced to us this week. Walk with a Mall, 12-foot tall puppet representing a 10-year-old Syrian refugee child. And Joe Martin is he's on Zoom. He's our contact for this event. If you're interested in volunteering, it's a Contact Joe event. So just a little background, because I think this is just a wonderful opportunity for us and how it aligns with our Rotary ideals and our focus areas. Amal represents someone who has been displaced from her home in Aleppo and separated from her family. She has become a global symbol of human rights, especially those of refugees. Since July of 2021, this wonderful puppet has traveled over 6,000 miles to 97 towns and cities in 15 countries and been welcomed by more than 1 million people. This year, between September 7th, which it's already started, and November 5th, Amal is journeying another 6,000 miles across the United States in one of the largest free public festivals ever created. More than 35 towns and cities from Boston to San Diego and 1,000+ artists and arts organizations will create over 100 free public events. And Flint is one of those cities. If you're familiar with the very dynamic artist, musician, rising Flint native star, Tunde Oleniran, he was, I believe, the reason why this sort of late minute ad to the roadmap for this tour is coming to Flint. And he's a very dynamic individual. If you've never witnessed their presentation, their art, their music, that I think alone might be a very colorful addition to the event. So tentatively, on this day at 5:30 to 8 p.m. will be a program. It's going to include paper doll making by the attendees, so that when Amal arrives, the children and families will have paper dolls to help welcome Amal. There'll be an activity facilitated through the Flint Institute of Arts. There will be a half-mile walk with Amal around the campus and the area around the cultural center, and volunteers are needed. So help with the craft activity, transition periods, moving families from one activity to another, getting them outdoors for the walk, and with the setup and cleanup of refreshments. So we invite you. And again, the alignment with Rotary, I just, Google is wonderful. Going on the Rotary International website, as you know, one of our focus areas is peace building, and this just has such a great alignment. Rotarians have a commitment to peace building, and we do this through initiatives that help create social cohesion, that transform conflict in our communities and around the world. More than 70 million people worldwide are displaced because of conflict, violence, or persecution. In collaboration with the United Nations Refugee Agency, Rotary has created a toolkit that offers Rotarian suggestions on how to engage with and advocate for refugee communities. If this is something that you're passionate about, Rotarians could definitely think of ways to engage here in Flint. I'll point out that the Flint Jewish Federation has been doing this for decades. They were a major part of refugee relocation from the Soviet Union. So learning more about global refugee crisis and the experiences of refugees in our communities can promote greater peace through understanding. So wonderful alignment with our Rotarian values. So mark your calendars. We'll hear a lot more about this. Last week, is Jerry here today? Did not see her. So Jerry talked about this event, just reminding you that the Center for Hope in the Rotary Kitchen is doing an event that is very cool way of introducing unsighted or people through the National Federation of the Blind Flint chapter into the kitchen and culinary arts. And she is the contact, Jerry, our own member and staff member at Catholic Charities. Her phone number, her email, please get in touch with her. She will sign you up. She'll be welcoming you that day and orienting you to that service. And then we also talked, Lynn helped us understand a little bit about the beer on tap event or the art on tap event at the Flint Institute of Arts. Speaking of, now you don't actually get to drink, there's free pizza. You have to work, but this is another way, if you're interested in supporting this event, you can contact our Linderman at Flint Arts or call that phone number. So
We've learned all about beer.
That's
and
right.
Bourbon
and beer.
That's important.
That fits our educational mission just very well. Okay. So one other thing I want to say about the Flint Public Library, Joe Martin's on the Zoom today. He arranged a meeting with the leaders at the Flint Public Library. We've been talking to them by email, but we had an in-person meeting this week to just investigate the possibility of creating what I'm going to call a service home at the Flint Public Library. Our clubs had a long interest and engagement in literacy and education. You know that through the renovation, we were a big part of that in a large grant that has the our Rotary Club's name on a room. So they were very excited about the possibilities, and they're going to get back to us after September 18th to discuss ways that we might have a more permanent arrangement with them for our volunteer service hours. So are there any health and welfare reports? And I'll move on to welcoming guests, and I see that we have a few. Always good.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm pleased to say we've got two guests here that I brought with me today. We have Karen Aldrich Easton, who works at the Office of Foundation Liaison and the interface between philanthropy and the governor's office. And also Shakina Clark, who's my colleague at Newfoundland. She's our community engagement officer.
Good afternoon, everyone. My guest today is Jim Couture, the Vice President, Commercial Law Officer with Wildfire Protection. We just moved into our market. So welcome, Jim. And Jim and I are fraternity brothers and sisters.
Oh. Everybody moved her.
I brought my daughter Hope with me today. She was with us years ago as the Rotary president. I tried to test her in the service, and I think she's going to help me reconstitute Rotary. So
Wonderful. And Elizabeth, would you like to come up? Oh, I'm sorry, forgetting the most important thing. And Fred is here. We need to do the raffle. Everybody pull out your raffle tickets.
Madam President, would you like to select an honors person to draw?
I'll just pick someone who's not either. But Karen, would you like to be our honorary ticket puller?
Are you, first of all, are you honest? Are you thoroughly under indictment right now?
Not yet, not yet.
You will be by the end of the meeting. You do me a favor then. Be careful. Big winners?
I'm gonna help you.
Oh, okay. Carefully stir the pot. This is fun. Who's gonna win the election? Whoever counts the ballots, right?
Right. One out.
I need
Just
one.
I will read it off. Thanks. 748053.
Oh, great. What might be greedy?
Who else I know?
748-119. And for the big bucks, first place winner.
2 gallons of gas in Rotary, right?
748-025.
Thank you very much.
Free gas for money. Okay. Now it's time for past President Elizabeth.
That's on. All right, everybody. Well, it's a pleasure to be back up here at the podium. You know, old habits die hard. I'm glad to welcome up today 2 guest speakers. The first is Thomas Hutchison, who is the Executive Director of Genesee County Habitat for Humanity. She's a licensed residential home builder and lead abatement supervisor in the state of Michigan with an aging in place specialist certification through the National Home Builders Association. He's also, I'll mention, a member of Greater Flint Sunrise Rotary. He came to the Genesee County Habitat affiliate in 2013 to work with the construction crew as an AmeriCorps member before starting their large-scale home improvement program in 2015. Since becoming executive director 3 years ago, he stayed focused on innovative partnerships and housing strategies to end poverty in Genesee County. Our second guest speaker today is Joel Arnold, who is a city planner who works for Communities First Incorporated. He's a graduate of Michigan State University, go Green, as well as University College Dublin, which if anybody else has graduated from there, I'll be duly impressed. I've been to the city, not the college. He has worked in community planning and development for more than a decade, and he previously worked in the city of Flint's Blight Elimination Division, working on neighborhood cleanups and blight elimination programs. And he also spent 3 years working on nonprofit community development in an agency in South Philadelphia, coordinating resident-led community planning and reinvestment. As a Flint resident, today he leads Community First urban planning work, as well as policy advocacy programs. So with that, please help me welcome Joel and Thomas.
Is this actually on, or is it better just to project?
I think we're good,
Yeah.
right? Can everybody hear us okay?
All right.
Oh, that's a good point.
Can't forget about that.
Is this, all right, we'll leave it up. We'll just swap. So me and Tom will swap back and forth on the podium here. But I thank you so much for the generosity of your time. Oh, that sounds like something. All right, well, thank you so much for the generosity of your time. Again, I'm Joel Arnold. And me and Tom are going to talk today basically just about what is really a local housing crisis that has been worsening noticeably over the last couple of years. So we'll go through statistics, where we're sitting at now, sort of how we got here, and then potential policy solutions that could be implemented to address this. It's a very multifaceted crisis. So today, there are quite a few different efforts to make housing in Flint and Genesee County more available, affordable, and accessible. You know, these are a couple of projects that have been done recently through organizations like Habitat, like Communities First, like Uptown Reinvestment Corporation, McFarland Villages are all doing work to try and address this. And whether it's new construction, restoration of vacant buildings, or renovation of substandard homes, there's a lot of partners who are working to address these issues. But what we're trying really to highlight here is the scale of what we're doing and the scale of how big this problem is. And really, unfortunately, what we're doing right now, as far as the scale of new housing or renovating housing, is not meeting the demand that we're facing. So I'll just touch briefly the overall housing shortage, and these figures are adjusted for inflation, which it's been has been elevated the last couple of years. Since 2017, housing costs in Genesee County have seen double-digit increase, with both sales prices and rental costs rising by double-digit percentages after accounting for inflation, which this is putting quality housing out of reach for many of our neighbors. Particularly for renters in our community, it's usually advised that people don't spend more than 30% of their income on housing costs, right? That's either rent or mortgage plus your utilities. And in our county, almost 3/4 of renters are spending more than 1/3 of their income. People are spending 30, 40, 50, 60% of their income just on housing and utilities. And over 1,000 Genesee County residents experienced homelessness in 2021, and 23,400 households are at risk of homelessness. And that usually means they are one, job loss, broken down car, financial calamity away from homelessness. And just for perspective on that, Genesee County only has about 400,000 people. So when you talk about that amount of folks, you're talking almost 4 to 5% of our county's population is at risk of homelessness, with 1,000 people experiencing it every single year. So we try to break this down. I'll talk about a couple categories. Tom's going to talk about a couple categories of this, and the way that this housing crisis is affecting different disparate groups of people in our community. So one example of how this housing shortage is impacting our community is through seniors. So households headed by those who are 64 plus in Genesee County rose from 42,000 households in 2016 to 47,000 households in 2021. So we're seeing more households that are headed by a senior, and yet at the same time, the share of seniors living in poverty also rose from just under 7% to just under 10% of seniors in our community, which means that we're seeing a larger percentage of a bigger group that is struggling with issues of poverty. Fortunately, because of Social Security benefits and other things that are here to support seniors in a non-means tested way, only 20% of senior homeowners and a little over half of senior renters in Genesee County spend over 30% of their income on housing. But this is a group that particularly is impacted because we know, if somebody's 83 years old living in a senior apartment, they can't just go pick up a shift and make some more money. These are folks on fixed incomes. So it's a group that's particularly impacted by the housing shortage. And when we talk about, examples of projects, McFarland Villages over on just take Lapeer Road out of here, go up towards where it meets Court Street, is doing a big redevelopment in their community of apartments over there for seniors. At Communities First, the image in the bottom is the renovation of Oak School over on 5th Street at 5th and Grand Traverse. That's 24 units of senior housing, but as we'll kind of get into, the scale sort of outstrips the impacts of these individual projects.
Thank you. So a few other statistics that we can talk about. 44% of homeowners in Genesee County make below 80% of the area median income. Generally, a Habitat for Humanity, that's the demographic of folks that we're serving, which is a large percentage of our population. Of these homeowners, 83% have incomplete kitchen facilities, incomplete plumbing facilities, or more than one person per room, and spend more than 40% of their income on housing. So this next one is a national statistic that there's been a 50% reduction of entry-level homes in the market since 1980. I haven't seen that statistic for Genesee County, but just as somebody who drives around, who pays attention to construction projects that are happening, new subdivisions that are being built, there is a much higher percentage of homes that are not available for entry level than that statistic would point towards. And only another statistic, only 35% of homes were affordable for families making below 80% of their area median income. Also, if you pay attention to that number and you look at the housing stock that's available for people that are under 80% of the area median income, that purchase price isn't necessarily the point of entry for that home. So we'll see, in Flint, we'll see homes on the market for $14,000, $15,000, which the sales price is certainly accessible for people making 80% of the area median income, which for a family of one is around $40,000. However, after inspection, you look at that house, it needs a new roof. At 10 square, that's gonna be about $7,500. You have a furnace, that's another $3,500. A water heater, $1,200. And so that cost, the barrier for entry into homes that are available for people that whose main financial goals, home ownership, and are working class families, we're seeing that they're very, very quickly being left out of the market and are constantly losing market share in the housing market of homes that are accessible to them.
So to kind of put this in perspective of the overall housing shortage, every year, every other year or so, reports have to be sent to the federal government to receive funds as an assessment of the condition of the local housing market. And particularly for those with very low incomes, Genesee County, we can take the number of people who have these incomes, the number of units that are available at 30% or less of the tenant's income. We are short 7,000 units of housing affordable for people. Each year, local developers are building anywhere from 100 to 200 new units to address that 7,000 unit gap. So assuming no population growth, no deterioration of the housing stock, no anything else, we will have this problem solved at our current pace of building in 35 years. This is why when we were talking about the scale of this issue is that, we're doing a lot of people are doing a lot of great work to address this. But it's important that we keep in mind the scope of these projects.
And if I could just say really quick, just the scope of that very low income, that's under 30% of the area. And so if you think 7,000 units short for people that are making under 30% of the area median income, that also leaves a number of units that are also inaccessible for people that are making over, between 30 and say 120%.
And one thing, again, we talk about seniors as a particular group that is unable to just pick up more hours, to make, more money to pay a higher rent. One of the more really painful statistics is that nearly 15% of the households in our county who are experiencing homelessness are households with kids. So these are kids living in cars, or if they're fortunate, maybe finding a family member to sleep on the couch for a night. But oftentimes it's genuine unstructured homelessness with children that are trying to figure out how to go to school. So we're just going to show a couple of projects to give an example of some of the things that are being done, I think, in our community that we're all proud of. But I would encourage you guys to, as we're going over this, to just keep an eye on the numbers of units and keep in mind that very low income percentage of 7,000 units short. So this is a development that we at Communities First did, Georgia Manor. It's in the Carriagetown neighborhood at First Avenue and Lyon. It sat empty for about 20 years. We were able to put funding together through a host of partners, renovate it into 26 units of mixed income housing, which means that some units are open and rentable to anybody, no matter your income. Some units are restricted to people with certain incomes. And that opened in 2022. So that was a good 26 unit project. It's been helpful for the neighborhood. Orchard Lane Apartments is an apartment community that we purchased in 2020 from a negligent landlord. And when we talk about a housing shortage, what it often does is even for people who may not be homeless, they're often forced into extremely substandard housing. So when we acquired this property, there were some units, a lot of them are two level apartments, like living room, kitchen on the first floor, bedroom upstairs. And there were some tenants in there who only had water on one floor and were running a rope system of a bucket from the second floor to the first floor to access water throughout their apartment. And when you have a housing shortage, those are the kinds of choices you force people to make. Because it's not this unit or a better unit. If the units you can afford are all rented, it's this unit or no. And so these are the things that happen. We acquired it, are now undergoing a full rehabilitation and a renovation with a commitment to keep the rents low and affordable to folks. But again, that's 45 units. And then one that's under construction right now, if any of you guys are ever over kind of by Athens Stadium at University of Grand Traverse, we're working on a new development that'll be 48 mixed income units of housing, ground floor community spaces and storefronts. Broke ground last summer with work actively occurring. We're hoping to finish it at the end of this year. That'll be 48. But so even between all three of those projects, right, which take a lot of time, that's about 110 units. So it's 110 units out of knowing that just for very low income folks, we need 7,000. So this is the context that's really important when we talk about the kind of investment that we need locally in housing.
And at Habitat, we focus more on home ownership. So we do smaller developments, generally, single family homes up to four plot, 4-unit townhomes and things like that. And just to give you an idea, and this will sort of shed some light about why we're seeing a reduction in workforce housing and entry-level homes. A single family home costs us about $230,000 to construct. An apartment unit is around 180 to 200,000. And then, you know, compared to the median sale prices, both in the city and out there, which are substantially lower than that. So this is a breakdown of a budget of a home that we built last year. I think that we either finished last year or the year before, but it was after COVID. So pre-construction costs, those are site assessments, architecture fees, all that kind of stuff. That's $7,090. Inspection, roughly $2,500. Site development, $14,000, because for some reason excavation, even though they don't have material costs, have gone through the roof. Our construction costs of $135,000, labor, $6,700, $500. Admin costs, 10 grand, total $237,794. The average mortgage of the person that is 80% of the area median income, the height of the families that we serve, can afford $110,000 mortgage. That is if this person is an absolute surgeon with their financing. So this isn't the average family that makes 80% of the area median income. This is a person that's been in the job market for a long time, that's been able to save, that's been able to avoid certain things that will put us at a big financial deficit, like a health incident or something like that. They can afford around $100,000 to $110,000, which leaves us with a required subsidy of $127,794. And this is the Habitat price. So this is a $0 developer fee. There's no land acquisition costs in here because we generally are able to pick up property from the land bank for a few $100s. And this is also a $0 profit because we're our own contractor. We're our own builder. We have our own carpenters that go out and build the homes. So this total build cost of, you know, $230,000, $240,000 is really not accessible to most nonprofit even.
So this conversation is certainly not just to make everybody feel like this is terrible, we should all be very depressed. I think, right, the goal is to talk about, well, what can we do about this, right? Because both our community and other communities in the past have faced housing shortages, and we've responded to them in various ways. So a couple of things that have happened at both the state level, sort of in other communities, and there's a couple sides that this can be attacked, right? It can be addressed on a funding side, it can be addressed on a regulatory side. But there is really no one solution to solve a housing crisis that's this pronounced. But you need to really, like, if we're going to address this as a community, we have to be prepared to address it from a couple of different perspectives. So from the funding side, what a couple of communities in the state of Michigan that are facing similar challenges have done is pass dedicated local millages explicitly to support the development and construction of quality, affordable, mixed income housing. Ann Arbor and Kalamazoo County both did this in 2020. Particular in Kalamazoo County, they levy about $1 million in their whole county and raises, you know, I think about $15 million a year. And in 2 years, their $15 million generated $114 million in housing development. Because I'm sure, you know, what anybody who does this building work is there's a lot of developments that die for lack of the last 10% of money. State government or banks or institutions, everybody loves funding 80% of something. They really love it, and then they want people to come in with matches. And so a lot of times when there's things like dedicated local funding, you close those last bits of gap, you bring in money from other places to do things that need to be done. And Kalamazoo County and Ann Arbor have been taking that approach. Other communities, Detroit has set up something called the Detroit Housing for the Future Fund, which is working now to direct capital and a lot of relationships with private banking institutions towards new housing construction. Detroit's been actually really intentional about building up partnerships with JPMorgan Chase and other large lenders to explicitly create funds to subsidize more affordable housing construction, more property renovations, homeowner repairs, things like that. And that's a model that can be approached as well. So those are kind of the funding sides. But then, you know, some communities don't have the money or oftentimes are more hesitant to attack that side. So then on the regulatory side, which most local communities control themselves, there's a host of things that can be done. We'll often kind of talk about Genesee County when it comes to housing as like a restaurant with one thing on the menu. And that's a single family detached house, which is 80% of our local housing stock is a single type of housing. So if you're interested in a duplex, a triplex, a row house, a courtyard sort of bungalows, a larger apartment building, we have 80% of one type of housing and 20% is everything else. And so what often happens is that type of housing is also the single most expensive type of housing to build. Because you have to have all your own independent walls, you know, you don't share a wall, you save a little money when you build, you know, a row house compared to a detached house, things like that. And yet in our communities, a lot make it not even just discouraged or maybe some extra steps, but oftentimes illegal to build anything except the most expensive type of housing to build. So we could address all these funding sides, but then if you go before your local planning commission and they say, well, it's illegal to build a duplex here no matter how much money you have, then you face that challenge. And that's one that local communities are able to address without, you know, putting a tax or a fund on anybody. That oftentimes can reduce the cost of new home construction. So this has become more common across the country, and even here in the state, the Michigan Association of Planning released a zoning reform toolkit to share with local units of government to try and talk about how changes in the way that we regulate our land use and the way that we regulate the types of housing that can be built are ways that we can unlock a lot of different types of housing. Because I would probably venture that somewhere between 70 and 80% of residentially zoned land in Genesee County is single family detached homes as the only permitted use, with some places allowing duplexes and triplexes as permitted uses, but it's often very limited. So these are a couple of things, whether it's things like dedicated local millage funding, things like partnerships with larger financial institutions, or the way that we regulate land in our community and those kinds of fees, that all can be done together to address this larger issue. But I think what the big point that Tom and I are trying to make is, you know, Habitat's doing great work, Uptown is doing great work, McFarland's doing great work, you know, we're doing our best at communities first, but the scale is just so large that we really need to have a serious regional conversation about taking on this issue, because at the end of the day, it often drives away new investment. People don't want to build here if their workers can find somewhere to live. And then for the folks that are here, it causes a lot of economic suffering. So Tom, I'm gonna all right, so then I think if there's time, we're happy to do questions and answers, but we again so appreciate you letting us come and speak today.
Framing question, just so we understand, housing, that includes what? That housing cost?
Oh, anywhere where people live.
Yeah, but
No.
rent,
Oh,
mortgage, utilities.
yes, so the housing cost
maintenance.
is basically the cost of your shelter, so it's gonna be your rent and or mortgage plus your utility costs. 30% of the income is usually what's like. So your rent, your mortgage, plus your consumer, your water bill, your home insurance. So in the back first and then.
Sorry. I start, I was writing down notes, so I'm gonna try and get this all out correctly. You say there's a large number of single family homes in this area as opposed to these multi-use options. So if we wanted to increase the level of housing, entry level housing stock, with some of the funding that is coming into the community, and I'm not sure what the label of where it's coming from, could it be used to repair houses that are in that dilapidated housing stock now, like furnaces, water heaters, roofs, so that these low-income households could stay in them or get in? I mean, because I hear about money floating around the community and we were trying to decide how to spend it.
So at Habitat for Humanity, we repair over 200 owner occupied homes a year, for that reason. And to increase our housing supply through rehab, definitely that is one solid strategy, depending on what the total cost is for that rehab. Because there are also standing structures that will cost well over $230,000 to bring back. But definitely preserving our current housing stock is extremely important to having a healthy housing market or housing ecosystem in a community. The other thing to consider also is that while single family homes are great, our family makeup is changing. So where 20 years ago, we would have an average of 4.5 people under one roof. Now we're seeing a lot of families that are smaller. A lot of families that are 1, 2, 3 people homes that are existing in homes that were once occupied by 5 to 7 people. And so the number of units, the number of individual units that we need is expanded past the capacity that we were needing through single family, just a generation.
I had a question on the Flint project you showed with the multi-use companies. Does the state of Michigan or HUD help subsidize the
Yes,
housing for those projects?
Yeah, so those projects, they're, a lot of them are supported through a federal tax, two of them, you guys, but there's the one called the low income housing tax credit, and essentially an incentive from the federal government for financial institutions to lend to projects on the condition that they will keep rents below 30% of a tenant's income for people in abandoned homes. What we try and do at Communities First is, in traditional mid-20th century public housing, there was a lot of 100% low income, we see this with Atherton East, we see this with other places, and then segregating them from the rest of the community, not providing social services, and then being surprised when that's not a successful model for social mobility. What we do when we do a lot of this development is, we'll receive tax credits like that to subsidize those units. But then we'll also try and make sure that there's also market rate units in there, and that they're close to a pharmacy and a grocery store and a transit line, so that you're having access to economic opportunity, but also so that people who are, the one that we're building at Grand Traverse University, if you are working in the cafeteria at Hurley or working as a doctor at Hurley, with different incomes there, everyone can still live in this same building, so that we are not isolating poverty, segregating people by income, but that we're kind of learning from mistakes of the past, using subsidies to subsidize some units and then renting other units out at market rate for anybody, with the note being that all the units are built exactly the same. There's not this is a low income unit, this is a market rate unit. They're all built, it's random in size.
Can I jump in on that as well? I just wanted to add, Joel brought up a good point. There's a very big funding mechanism for rental housing, which is the low income tax credit. That currently doesn't exist for home ownership, for building or repairing homes for home ownership. However, there's currently a bill called the Neighborhood Homes Investment. And we really, really hope that you'll reach out to your representatives and share your support for that. It is a bipartisan bill, which is the same sort of funding mechanism as a tax credit that we would be able to apply for and install in order to build homes or rehab.
I have a question. How much is, when you work in a community looked at in terms of availability to stores and hospitals and all those kinds of things, and green space and things like that where children can play and all that? I mean, we got a lot of buildings all over the place to fix, you need to. A lot of people don't have access to walk places.
I think that's a wonderful point. It's something that at Communities First, we put a lot of emphasis on. We'll never build a development where you can't easily walk or take the public transit to a grocery store pharmacy, things like that, because people do need to use their amenities, especially people who are low income and middle income. And I can say the state will explicitly, like when we go to apply for some state subsidy or funding to close, Tom showed that $127,000 gap that goes, if people have to get creative in closing, a lot of those, you'll get scored explicitly on the site you choose. And the score will be, is there a school within a half a mile? Is there a grocery store within a mile? Is there a park? So if you go in an application, there's no grocery store, no school, no park. It's oftentimes hard to get funding. Now that opens up another conversation that then you oftentimes create a chicken and egg with disinvested neighborhoods, where the state says, well, we don't want to subsidize it in that neighborhood because it doesn't have amenities for people who are trying to, maybe escape poverty and work their way up. But then from the neighbor's perspective, they can't get the amenities because not enough people are there. So, right. So oftentimes that's a challenge that we run into, and people will say, why don't you do a development in this location or that location? And it'll often be if that location lacks amenities, it can be hard to get that financing done.
And the part of that is that a lot of businesses that are in an area where people are poor, have a lot of loss. It seems to me that hopefully some agency would take into consideration helping businesses to like when I was in Brazil, for example, you walked in the building there, they had rotating doors, revolving doors, so it's pretty hard to steal something and the door stopped. So you got not in every building, but things like that. But those kinds of things are part of what you're doing, because all those things, people need to walk around.
So Joel, could you talk a little bit about Flint and the proportion of the housing stock that is now rental occupied versus homeowner occupied, and how much of that rental occupied is by private investors not residing in
Yeah. Well, and again, I can estimate the numbers off the top of my head, I won't do it, but the city, the last that I was aware of is just barely over 50% majority renter. So most people that are living in the city of Flint now are renters, although we still have a pretty sizable home ownership population that is quite a bit higher than oftentimes other communities with low income. Sometimes that's connected to our also relatively lower housing prices compared to some other communities. As far as a lot of those rental properties being owned by people not from local areas, we see that a lot. And I can speak from my time working in the planning department here, the amount of blight violations, code enforcement violations that we were mailing to an LLC in Florida or an LLC in California or an LLC in New York was all the time. I mean, and so you see a pretty sizable chunk of the rental stock that is oftentimes, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does make it much more tough to do accountability and to do inspections with folks like that. I think we're seeing a lot of most of the newer construction lately locally is from locally headquartered organizations, whether it's from McFarland Villages or Habitat or Uptown, us. Those are all Flint-based organizations. So that's been a positive side. But we have seen, especially in the last 50 years, a real growth in the percentage of members in our community who are renters and the percentage of a lot of those units that are owned by out-of-town landlords, which can create quite a few problems as far as maintenance responsibility. Because oftentimes there are folks from other communities that don't also totally understand the local real estate market and think if they sit on some property, it'll explode in value in the next 5 years. And usually what happens is it deteriorates, it catches on fire.
Are there maybe ordinance opportunities in that to encourage more engaged and responsible landlords so that we don't have these landlords that just allow the violations to pile up and they don't serve their homes for families that are stuck there. The families don't really want to report it because this is the only place they can afford, but so there are other communities that have successfully managed having people who are not already investing to encourage that investment in properties.
I'm trying to think of other communities. I will say one, and to that end, I was really shocked. I was at a conference and sitting with, code compliance officers from Baltimore and Chicago and a few other cities. And I always thought as a citizen that it was a no-brainer. Like for Flint, I had no idea why we were having such a struggle with code enforcement when it should bring in a lot of dollars to the city. In that conversation, I found out that it's actually very expensive to do code compliance. So it would have to be something that the city would be prepared to invest a significant amount of dollars into. The only place that I saw was Baltimore, which pretty much broke even on their code compliance, but.
And I mean, some communities that you see with maybe more aggressive rental registration, and rental inspection programs are oftentimes like college towns will do this, because they'll have very high rental percentages of their income. But at the same time, right, they're often much wealthier, right? Because much of their tax base is high paid academic professionals, people connected to universities. So we run into that same problem, like Tom is saying, that code enforcement is very expensive. And you know, there's a million reasons on the challenges of that. You know, I think it's a good worthwhile use of investment to make sure that we're doing that, because then we prevent the deterioration of our housing stock. But it's certainly a tough issue, and one thing that we used to struggle with is you had some landlords from out of town, particularly that may have picked up a house at auction for $5,000, $6,000, and you were always towing this line of, well, you could really aggressively enforce the code, but the property wasn't really increasing in value, so at a certain point they'll just say, well, this doesn't go for anything. And then the land bank comes in, right? Who already cannot manage the massive portfolio that they have. So it's how do you kind of toe that line between enforce, right? It's easy to do code enforcement in Birmingham because, you know, people want to own a $400,000, $500,000 house, you know, but it can be a lot more challenging where it's like, how do you do that in a way that you don't increase foreclosures, increase disinvestment in neighborhoods, but at the same time aren't saying that the standards here are different. Because people who live in Flint deserve to live on this nicest street as someone who lives in Grand Blanc, in fact, or Birmingham or
More of a comment. This has been kind of self-created by the diminishing tradespeople. You talk about the cost of excavation and stuff like that. You can't get employees. You know why you can't get employees? Because when you talk in school, they don't talk about Joe the plumber unless it's negative. Oh, you don't want to be, fixing toilets. You don't want to be digging ditches. All of those jobs are demonized in education. And I'm sorry, I used to speak at the Flint schools 30 years ago. This was predictable. The trades guys, we've known this is coming because that's how we were talked about in the school. You got to go to college or you're going to be a loser. If you don't get, a degree, you might as well deal drugs. That's your options. If you live in the city of Flint, you can go to college or you work the street as a drug dealer. And they didn't encourage anything in between. And now we've got a lot of educated people with degrees that don't pay anything because they're saturated. It's frustrating to me because I had these conversations for the last 30 years. I was asked not to come speak to the school kids anymore because I don't have an education, and I, formal beyond high school, which I'm a Flint graduate, and I didn't go to college, and I'm more successful than most of my friends that went to college and spent a hell of a lot of money on a formal degree. And in the same time, we took all of this out of the schools. We don't have shop class. We don't have it. People used to fix their own houses. People don't know how to fix shit anymore. So now that costs so much because he knows how to fix that toilet. And our kids and a lot of adults don't even know the basics about home repair or any of that. We've taken that out of the school. So sorry.
Yeah, no, and I agree.
So it's
And you're entirely right, and trying to address that is gonna be one of the key issues, because labor costs keep going up, so fewer and fewer tradespeople doing these jobs. And I know we've talked with some professions that have a median age of 52, 53, 54. That's not sustainable. And this is gonna get worse.
I think schools are really starting to respond to that.
Good, in 35 years.
Yeah.
You know,
So I will close just inviting everybody. So one thing that has been going on at the state level is last year, the state of Michigan adopted its first ever statewide housing plan. Somehow the state has been around since the 1830s, and we never thought that maybe we should have a housing plan. And so there's been folks in our region that have been working on a regional implementation strategy for that housing plan. So if you can write this down, if you want to join, on September the 19th is a Tuesday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. There is going to be an open house in the Ramsdale room at the Flint Farmers Market. 11 to 1, if you're working, stop by and get lunch. If you are not working, come and spend 2 hours with us. We'll talk about housing. But it's really talking about what things locally people want to prioritize to address issues in our housing crisis. So again, it's the Flint Farmers Market, Ramsdale room, September 19th, 11 to 1. Please stop by. That'll be part of the state housing plan.
And Joel and Tom, thank you so much. What important information for Rotarians to have and to share with our community. We appreciate you, and one of the ways we show that is we've made a donation in names to Rotary International to help the eradication of polio. So again, thank you so much. Another in service this week. Oh, we had a conclusion. There we go. Thank you, everybody who did pitch in to make today possible. Jean, thank you so much for the video and the time you took being there, taking the pictures, putting it all together, and then sharing it with us. Really appreciate it. Elizabeth for doing today's speaker introduction, and George was on the list for setup and takedown, but I haven't seen George, so thank you for probably Mike for doing it. And registration, Terry Mormon and Fred I'm so glad you're back, and did our 50-50 raffle today, and Ed Fletcher was on the meeting as our Zoom host. So homework, getting used to the new schedule. There's actually nothing happening next week. Can you believe that a third Thursday and a fourth Friday could be separated by just one day? So our calendar's a little wonky in September, so homework, look for our newsletter every week. Past President Elizabeth is doing yeoman's work on putting together this new format. Everything you need to know is in it, and be sure to look at it and find and figure out what you're going to do this year to this month to earn your place in the world, as Jane told us about, and there's a lot of service opportunities. But I will see you next at Simmer, downtown Flint, South Saginaw Street in the Hilton Garden Hotel for our happy hour social networking event. Thank you all so much for being here and being part of creating hope in the world. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.